Last week, a 22-year-old man was arrested for the murder of Ballarat woman Samantha Murphy, who has been missing since the 4th of February. Patrick Orren Stephenson has been named as the man accused of the murder. We now know his name, but his identity was initially kept secret under a suppression order. So what are suppression orders? And what do we know about the alleged murder of Samantha Murphy?
What actually happened?
So this case has had a lot of media attention in the last kind of month or so. So Samantha Murphy was a mother of 3 and she was 51 years old. And like you said, she's been missing since the 4th of February. And she basically vanished without a trace. Here's what we do know. We do know that she was last seen when she left her home to go for a run in Ballarat, which is a city west of Melbourne. So for about a month, we had very little information about what exactly happened to Samantha. And then last week, Victorian Police made this announcement.
Detectives from the Missing Persons Squad yesterday morning at 6 a.m. arrested a 22-year-old Scotsburn man. They arrested him at his home address and took him into custody. The man was interviewed over a number of hours. A number of search warrants have been executed. As a result of those investigations, he has today been charged with the murder of Samantha. We will be alleging that murder occurred at Mount Clare on the day she disappeared.
So police announced that a 22-year-old man had been arrested for the murder of Samantha Murphy.
And when police made that announcement, they didn't tell us who they had actually charged, which is quite rare, right?
Yeah, and that is a suppression order.
Okay, and so there was lots of discussion online about why the system allows things like this to happen, suppression orders, where the identity of someone accused of a crime like murder can actually be protected. I do think that this is an interesting feature of our legal system and something that obviously interacts with media.
Yeah.
Can you just explain it?
Yeah, so there's been quite a few cases where suppression orders have been really controversial in Australia. So I think the first thing to say is you need to understand that Australia's judicial system is based on the principle of open justice.
What's that?
And that basically means court proceedings are normally available for the public to see. I used to go to court for a law assignment while I was studying at university. You can walk in.
And we've watched cases on YouTube. They are fairly accessible.
Yeah, and the whole idea behind that is the public should know what's going on in the court system. But suppression orders, which are also sometimes called gag orders, are introduced in special circumstances if there is a need to actually restrict what is made public.
So we have an open court justice system with this basic understanding that what happens in courts should be public. But then suppression orders, on the flip side, can force people to keep things a secret if required.
Yeah.
Why would there be a need to keep some things private, like the name of an alleged murderer?
So the judge could have a range of reasons why they think the name needs to be sealed from the public. And it can be for things like the names of alleged victims and perpetrators in particularly sensitive cases, locations of where people live. It could be any detail really of a case.
So it's not always the name that we're talking about here of, for example, the alleged perpetrator.
It often is. I mean, in reality, it often is the name, but it can also include any other identifying factors. I've seen some cases where suppression orders have been placed upon the name of a school, of a family member, of somebody involved. And more specifically, there could be instances where alleged victims of crime want to stop their name from being revealed. And that's because of the undeniable stress of being in the public eye.
Okay.
The judge might also decide that an alleged offender's safety is at risk, including for mental health reasons. It could also be deemed necessary in high-profile cases, so when there's heaps of media attention around a certain trial, if there's a risk that a person's right to a fair trial could actually be undermined by the publishing of details by the media.
But what happens if the media doesn't abide by that? I mean, like, it's this rule that we all know as journalists that we have to abide by. Well, what happens if you don't?
Well, there's big fines that publishers might have to pay. You could be fined more than $500,000. Those fines are decided state by state. So there's no consistent rule across the country, but it's a lot of money.
Whenever I think about suppression orders, the case that I often come back to is of Cardinal George Pell, because there was a suppression order that forbid the media from saying his name in a case several years ago. And then media got in trouble.
Which is the really interesting bit.
Yeah, when some did use his name.
Exactly. And those two factors there, the fact that such a high-profile individual had their name suppressed for so long, but also then that media got in trouble for trying to see how far they could push it, makes this a really interesting example. So for those who don't remember, in 2018, a judge made a controversial decision to stop media publishing any details of the trial of George Pell, so kind of a blanket ban, who was at that time Australia's most high-profile Catholic figure, and he was accused of sexually abusing 2 boys. Now, many media outlets tried really creative ways of getting around the suppression order. They did things like identified him as the most high-profile Catholic figure. They would, allude to things that he'd done in the past. And ultimately, they got in a lot of trouble for it. And 14 Australian publications collectively paid more than $1 million for their reporting on the case. Now, Pell was found guilty in that case, but the verdict was then overturned on appeal 2 years later.
And that was obviously a massive moment.
Huge moment.
But I want to go back to right now, where there was a suppression order in the case of the alleged murder of Samantha Murphy.
Yeah.
Why was there this suppression order in this case? We're not talking about someone as high profile as George Pell.
It's slightly different, yeah. So when this man was charged, his lawyers successfully sought a suppression order. So they applied to the court to have his name suppressed, due to concerns for the alleged perpetrator's mental health and the risk of limiting the fairness of the trial. To tease out that fairness of the trial a bit more, that basically means that if it's a jury trial, they can't run the risk that somebody has read media reports with that person's name if the court deems that could put at risk the idea of having a fair jury. And all of that meant that the media couldn't actually publish his name, including us.
And it meant that when we did publish stories around this, we turned off the comments because people would have felt inclined to comment his name, and then all of a sudden you end up in a situation where the media is inadvertently still publishing his name.
Exactly. But then, and this is very common when suppression orders are placed in high-profile cases, a group of media outlets made a legal argument against the order. And
saying they should be allowed to publish his name.
Exactly. And the point they were arguing to the court was that their reporting was not going to influence the trial. Rather, they just wanted to tell their readers or viewers exactly what was happening.
And so what happened?
So on Friday last week, lawyers for the alleged murderer actually dropped the suppression order request themselves, meaning media could reveal that the man accused of murder is 22-year-old Victorian man Patrick Orren Stephenson. And there's been a lot of commentary about how media are reporting this next part of information, but a lot of media reports follow up by saying that he's the son of former AFL player Orren Stephenson.
And so what do we know about the alleged perpetrator, other than, I guess, what his dad did for a job?
Yeah, and that's kind of almost as much as we do know. We don't know a lot about this man. We do know that he's from the Ballarat area. We don't know how he was connected to Samantha Murphy. Police have said, though, that they believe this was, quote, a deliberate attack.
You said there that his legal team actually dropped the case for a suppression order.
Yeah, his legal team withdrew the request.
Why would they do that?
So his lawyers spoke in court on Friday, and according to the ABC, one of his lawyers said the current media storm has now become inclusive of the family of the accused, and the defence intention to assist, so their application to have that suppression order, has only become far more destructive as a mechanism to the client.
Why? Because everyone was focusing on that suppression order and who it was about.
It became a bit of a kind of guessing game of who this person was. And the lawyer also kind of criticised how much attention, as you said, the suppression order itself was receiving. Stephenson has also not entered a plea deal, meaning we don't know if he will plead guilty or not guilty. So basically, can't give you many answers, but this will be a developing story.
Sam, I think it's interesting to understand how suppression orders work, because it's something that we have to abide by in media. And, you know, I often see comments on other posts that we do asking why, for example, we've turned off comments or asking why we've made a certain decision not to name an alleged perpetrator. So I think this, you know, idea of media literacy is really important and is something that we will continue to try and do here at the Daily Aus. Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. If you learnt something, let us know. You can leave a comment on Spotify. If you head to today's episode, there's a little question box there. Let us know what you think. Otherwise, we'll be back in your ears again tomorrow. Have a great day.